Good day, Crime Talk aficionados. My name is Scott Reich, and this is Crime Talk. Let's get straight to the docket. First, who will Josh Duggar be hugging tonight while he remains in custody? No trial today in the Ghislaine Maxwell matter. Alex Murdaugh. Are the feds coming? Next, the Crumbleys in Michigan. Well, they've all lawyered up. No decision just yet on Jussie Smollett after starting the second day of deliberations. Let's talk about rising crime in America. And then finally, our dumb criminal of the day. Let's talk about it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is Thursday, December 9th, 2021. My name is Scott Reich, and this is Crime Talk, the most fact-driven, unbiased, true crime channel. All right, first on the docket, who will Josh Duggar, rhymes with hugger, be hugging tonight in custody? I don't know. His name could be Butch or something. I don't know. Jurors in the Josh Duggar trial returned early Thursday morning with their verdict after deliberating for 6 hours. Mr. Duggar was found guilty of all charges regarding possession inappropriate images of minors. Now, Mr. Duggar apparently then broke down in tears as the United States Marshals handcuffed him, and he mouthed, "I love you," to his wife, Anna, who was inside the courtroom and has been there by his side the whole time. Now, Mr. Duggar's father, Jim Bob, put his hands in his pocket, looked down, and hugged Anna. The trial lasted 8 days in federal court there in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and the prosecution showed over the course of the trial, and the jury had to consider during its deliberations, images that were from Mr. Duggar's computer device and described to the jury and the steps that took to scour the dark web for these videos. Now, Mr. Duggar's defense attorneys fired back saying that Mr. Duggar did not have the technical skills of a computer hacker capable of finding such images, and also unsuccessfully used the defense that someone else could have accessed his devices. Now, Mr. Duggar's sister, Jill, who is also one of the victims from his previous transgressions, made her first appearance at the trial on Wednesday, and she had been named as a potential witness. Now, the Judge Brooks, declared Duggar will remain in custody due to the seriousness of his crime, and the sentencing date will be set out in about 4 months. So let's talk about this. First, I told you early on, these are difficult cases for the defense. The only defense is that the defendant was not the one behind the keyboard. Well, that didn't quite work in this particular situation. The defense called in an expert. The jury rejected that testimony that it was possibly somebody else that could have used this computer. But the fact, more than likely, it was Josh Duggar's own statements, particularly where he asked about, or you hear about the images before the agents even started questioning him. Not good. And then the other defense, which was basically, my client's too stupid to figure out those fancy computer things. Unless, of course, he really wanted to have those images, which the jury said those are his. So what's going to happen now? Well, the judge revoked Mr. Duggar's bond, which is not unusual given a case like this. He will remain in custody. He's not going to get probation, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Duggar is going to prison. The court will order that a pre-sentence investigation be conducted. It will be background information about Mr. Duggar's youth, his education, his family life, any issues that may have caused him trouble throughout the years to see what sort of rehabilitation may be possible. They will also do what they refer to as a psychosexual evaluation. And they'll basically ask Mr. Duggar to talk about very embarrassing things and why he may have a proclivity to prepubescent children. Those reports are sometimes a little embarrassing to read. Now, if Mr. Duggar does not comply or do the participation in the psychosexual evaluation, it will bode even more negatively for him at sentencing. Then the probation officer, they call them probation officers, but you don't usually get probation in federal court, prepares a report, and they will do an analysis under the criminal sentencing guidelines. And under the federal sentencing guidelines, they will look at his criminal history as well as the offense here. And they will do the calculations, and they will look at this big table and say, this is the presumptive sentence that Mr. Duggar should receive. At that point, the defense will then file a motion under 18 United States Code 3553A, which is a motion for variance, basically saying that, Judge, although those federal sentencing guidelines that used to be mandatory but are now simply advisory, that you should consider a much lower reduced sentence, arguing that the court needs to consider the appropriate sentence and not sentence Mr. Duggar to a sentence no greater than reasonably necessary to accomplish the rules of sentencing, which are basically punishment, deterrence, not only to Mr. Duggar, but those that are familiar with his crime, as well as rehabilitation of Mr. Duggar in the future, so when he does get out of prison, he doesn't do this again. All right? Now, there's going to be restrictions more than likely in place when Mr. Duggar is in fact released, that he may not be able to be around anyone under the age of 18, including his own children. That varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction and judge per judge. So you just have to wait and see. This was a case where early on, I figured that it was going to go to jury trial, even though the evidence appeared to be rather overwhelming. And apparently there was little doubt in the jurors' minds at all that Josh Duggar possessed these inappropriate images. But I have seen it very often when somebody who comes from a very religious family and there's something of a sexual nature, they would rather go to prison for the rest of their lives than to admit they did something wrong and inappropriate. And I think that's kind of the case of Mr. Duggar. I had a case years ago. Evidence was absolutely overwhelming. Only thing that was ever told was it never happened. Okay, we went to a 4-week trial. The jury deliberated 32 minutes because it was so obvious as to what was taking place. It was obvious to everyone except the defendant and his family. So that's what happens. We wish Mr. Duggar well. Hopefully no one wants to cuddle with him, but he is going to be on the bottom of the food chain in any prison system when you're convicted as basically being a chili mo. Okay? That's it. You're a child molester. You have images. You're a child molester. Bottom line. Good luck, Mr. Duggar. We'll follow this as the sentencing proceeds. Next on the docket, Ghislaine Maxwell. That's right. The defense's momentum was going pretty well, and the prosecutors even announced that they were going to rest their case by this Friday. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, the government said this trial was supposed to last for 6 weeks. And there's been a lot of courtroom observers, and we talked about this last night on our live, that have said the government is screwing this case up. They, the government attorneys and the witnesses, appear to be unprepared for the cross-examination put forth by the defense. So we'll see. Anyway, the case was put on pause today after one of the attorneys advised that somebody on their team was ill and they had to get care. It's not known which attorney was sick. Nobody knows exactly what the reason was, whether it was coronavirus or something else. Nobody knows for sure. So the jurors were sent home and they were told to expect to return Friday for the case to resume. Now, we talked about briefly yesterday a bunch of images that had never been basically seen before regarding Ghislaine Maxwell and that guy named Jeff aboard this his Lolita Express plane that he had, as well as some photos with some individuals. One was John Locke Brunel. Now, Mr. Brunel was 75, and he was charged with sexual assault, criminal conspiracy, and trafficking of minors by the French police last year. Mr. Brunel denies all charges. And according to claims from multiple people regarding these alleged victims, Mr. Brunel was aiding that man named Jeff the same way Miss Maxwell had been in terms of providing underage victims for sexual assaults, which are the allegations. Now, Mr. Brunel, the former boss of agencies including Karen Models, which was arrested at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris a year ago as he tried to board a flight to Dakar, Senegal. The indictment stems from an allegation that Brunel drugged a 17-year-old model at a nightclub and then sexually assaulted her back in the 90s. Mr. Brunel protested his innocence, and the latest complaint has not been named for legal reasons, but she is now in her 40s and believed to be living somewhere in the United States. The allegations are that Mr. Brunel, like I said, had raped her at a Paris home after a night out at a nightclub where she believes that a drug was placed in her drinks. So obviously we're following the Ghislaine Maxwell trial rather closely, And any new news we will bring to you when it breaks. Next on the docket, let's talk about Mr. Alec Murdaugh. Are the feds coming? Well, a lot of people think that the attorneys for Mr. Murdaugh are trying to get the Federal Bureau of Investigation to basically anticipate them having charges brought by the United States attorney. Now, that could potentially complicate things for the state prosecutors, but it doesn't mean that it won't happen. The defense attorneys for Mr. Murdaugh seem to want this to take place, and the reason why they want to do this, and no one's going to say it, is frankly that the potential penalties for basically white-collar crime are much less severe in the federal system than they are in the state system. Let me give you an example. Although not really white-collar crime, but you could steal several $1 million and be charged in a federal offense, and your sentence will be significantly less than it would normally be in the state system. Let me give you an example. I had a client several years ago charged with bank robbery. The feds didn't pick it up. Why? It wasn't an FDIC insured facility, so it was just a good old-fashioned aggravated robbery. Well, the presumptive range is 10 to 32 years in prison here in the state. But under the federal sentencing guidelines, had that bank robbery taken place at a federally FDIC insured location where the feds could have assumed jurisdiction, guess what? He would have been looking at 5 to 6 years. Okay? Big difference. Why are the laws so less when it comes to federal sentencing guidelines? Well, they're drafted by members of Congress. And members of Congress are lobbied by people that don't want to go to prison if they were to violate some white-collar crime type of law, right? i.e. stealing money, some sort of wire fraud, something along those lines. So members of Congress don't want, themselves or their friends, if they do get in trouble, to go to prison for a long time. So the penalties are a lot less severe. So that is why, and no one will tell you this, but I am, that is why the defense attorneys for Mr. Murdaugh are trying to get something resolved in the federal system rather than the state system. But normally the feds can call up and say, hey, state prosecutor, we're taking over, drop your case. The state doesn't have to do that. You can be charged with separate crimes in both state and the federal system that are very similar in nature but a little different elemental-wise, and the both entities, both sovereigns, the state and the feds, could prosecute him. But normally the feds take control. And that's why the defense attorney for Alex Murdaugh are trying to get the feds to take over the case. All right. Remember the Crumbleys? That's right. They're the parents of the 15-year-old boy who went on that fatal Oxford High School shooting spree. Well, everybody has been lawyered up. Okay. The 15-year-old, he's been given a court-appointed lawyer, and his parents have hired a couple of pricey women to represent them. They specialize in sexual crimes and child abuse and internet crimes. And as you may recall, Ethan Crumbley, he's been charged with killing 4 fellow students and wounding 6 more, plus a teacher in a shooting rampage on November 30th. The attorneys wouldn't comment on the case, the court-appointed attorney, and said until she would have time to review the thousands of pages of discovery. I wish her luck. It is a pretty open and shut case for the prosecution on that one, unless there is some sort of mental health defense. Well, then we have Jennifer and James Crumbley, the parents. Well, they've been charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter after the prosecutors learned or alleged that James Crumbley bought the gun used in the shooting as an early Christmas present for his son. And the parents were called in to speak with their son and school officials, and they insisted that he be sent back to class. And then it's alleged about 3 hours later, he allegedly began the massacre. Later that day, the parents fled Oxford, but their attorneys insist they intended to return in the morning. A manhunt was conducted by the U.S. Marshal Service, and the couple was found early on December 4th. Now, attorneys Smith and Lehman, representing the Crumbleys, also represented convicted child predator and former U.S. gymnastic coach Larry Nassar. Nassar was found guilty on a variety of sexual misconduct charges and is spending the rest of his life in prison. But that's who they've hired. Everyone is entitled to a defense, and everyone is entitled to an attorney. We'll give them all the presumption of innocence. Now, on to Jussie Smollett. The jurors began their second delay of deliberation, and as of time of filming this show, well, the jury has not reached a decision as to whether Jussie Smollett, fabricated the story regarding being attacked and involved in a hate crime, or whether it actually took place. As you may recall, Mr. Smallette got up there and testified and said he's telling the truth. He's always been telling the truth. And it's really the Nigerian brothers who are out to get him. So we'll see. The jury is considering who they need to believe and whether the prosecution has proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt. We'll try to bring you that information as quickly as it happens. Next on the docket, let's talk about rising crime. Philadelphia has shattered its 30-year-old record for annual murders, surpassing the much larger cities of New York and Los Angeles, as a dozen major cities post all-time records for homicides. As of December 6, Philadelphia has recorded 521 homicides for the year, surpassing New York's 443, and Los Angeles has 352. Now, Chicago, which leads the nation with 739 murders this year. Now, Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago remain below their records that were set back in the 90s, but at least a dozen large mid-tier cities across the country have already broken their annual records. Now, this trend follows national calls to defund the police departments, and in some cities, reform to bail rules that critics claim let dangerous offenders loose pending trial. Among the dozen cities setting some new homicide records within the last 5 years are Indianapolis, Indiana, Columbus, Ohio, Louisville, Kentucky, Toledo, Ohio, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. 4 other cities have blown past records set during the crime waves of the 80s and 90s. St. Paul, Minnesota, Portland, Oregon. And Portland, Oregon's police chief basically said, you're on your own. Unless it's a murder in progress, we're probably not going to show up. Austin, Texas, and Rochester, New York. Now, despite Philadelphia blowing past their record of 500 murders set in the 1990s, the city's district attorney, Larry Kranzner, a champion of bail and police reform, insists that there is no crime wave whatsoever. Well, let's talk about some of the crime that's going on out there. A 71-year-old Chinese man was executed, and I mean executed, a block from his Chinatown home in Chicago in a suspected random attack on his way to buy a newspaper Tuesday afternoon. Woom Sing T was walking by a school when a silver 2-door car slows down by him when an unidentified driver, to be in his 20s, pulls out a gun and begins shooting T. The driver parks, steps out of the vehicle, and continues to unload his weapon on the wounded man, killing him. All caught on video. A Bronx man was shot in the head and killed, and his 18-year-old girlfriend was injured in their white BMW after 3 masked men pulled up beside them and fired multiple times at the couple. The men pull up in their black BMW sedan behind Sergio Jimenez, 21, on Sunday night in the Bronx, with one of the killers sticking his body out of the car's sunroof armed with a gun. Another man fires from the back seat while a third gunman leaps out of the car to begin shooting at the couple. The third gunman appears to have trouble reloading his firearm after firing multiple shots, giving up and getting back into the car before all 3 of them drive off. Also, all on video. Then let's jump to Houston. A robber calmly walked into a Chevron gas station and shot a clerk in the face without making any demands before trying to steal the cash from the register. The employee is expected to survive the point-blank shooting after stumbling out of the store and crying for help. Now, the shooter, who the police described as a heavyset black man with a beard, was unable to actually steal any cash and is still on the loose. I don't know, ladies and gentlemen. You tell me, and maybe we should let the prosecutor in Philadelphia know, is it a crime wave? According to him, no, it's not. Could it be because of the policies in place of defunding the police as well as bail reform? Let me know in the comments what you think. Next on the docket, our dumb criminal of the day. 48-year-old Missouri woman Laura Oglesby stole her 20-year-old daughter's identity and lived as an undergraduate college student for 2 years. Oglesby pled guilty to 1 count of intentionally providing false information to the Social Security Administration. Authorities said she used the Social Security card information from her estranged daughter to get into Southwest Baptist University in Missouri. She also used the Social Security card to obtain a driver's license and to obtain student loans. Now, according to the Mountain View Police, she even had boyfriends that believed that she was 22 years old. Somehow, I don't think this is going to help that estranged relationship with Miss Oglesby and her daughter. Dumb, dumb, dumb. All right, that's all we have for you today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Crime Talk.